The 22nd of June, 1941. With 134 divisions at full fighting strength and 73 more divisions for deployment behind the front, Nazi Germany, under the codename Operation Barbarossa, invades the Soviet Union, its ally, in the war against Poland. Hitler considers the invasion as part of his plan to provide the German nation with Lebensraum, meaning living space, and an opportunity to destroy communism, which he loathes. The Soviet Union sees catastrophic military losses, and millions of its soldiers fall into German captivity, where they are subjected to starvation, disease, and brutal treatment. Thousands of them decide to switch sides, join the German army, and fight against Stalin and his regime. One of the Soviets who collaborate with Nazi Germany will become the leader of the newly established Lokot Republic and the commander of the infamous Kaminski Brigade. Operating mainly in Belarus and Poland, his men will engage in mass rape, looting, and indiscriminate killings, resulting in tens of thousands of civilian deaths. His name is Bronislav Kaminski. Bronislav Vladislavovich Kaminski was born on the 16th of June, 1899 in the Vitebsk Governorate, then part of the Russian Empire. His father was an ethnic Pole with Belarusian roots, and his mother an ethnic German. Although of a diverse background, Kaminski identified as Russian. He studied at the St. Petersburg Polytechnical Institute before serving in the Red Army during the Russian Civil War, which lasted from November 1917 to October 1922. After demobilization, he returned to his studies and later worked as an engineer at a chemical plant. In 1935, Kaminski was expelled from the Communist Party, and just 2 years later, during Stalin's Great Purge, he was arrested for criticizing forced collectivization and allegedly maintaining ties with Germans and Poles. According to the authorities, he was part of a counter-revolutionary group. The Second World War started on the 1st of September 1939, when Germany invaded Poland. Poland found itself fighting a two-front war when it was invaded by the Soviet Union from the east on the 17th of September. Warsaw officially surrendered to the Germans on the 28th of September, and 1 day later, in accordance with a secret protocol of their non-aggression pact, Germany and the Soviet Union partitioned Poland. Less than 2 years later, on Sunday the 22nd of June 1941, Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union. The same year, Kaminski was released from prison and settled in the Bryansk region, where he began working as an engineer at a local distillery. Several months after the invasion, German forces reached the area around the township of Lokot near Bryansk, capturing the city on the 6th of October. As the German occupation expanded, Kaminski and his friend Konstantin Woskobojnik, a local teacher, approached the German military authorities with an offer to assist in setting up a civilian administration and local militia. The Germans approved, and Woskobojnik was appointed mayor of Lokot, while Kaminski became his deputy. Together, and with support from General Oberst Heinz Guderian's 2nd Panzer Army, they began organizing a militia of thousands of men to combat Soviet partisans in the region. This force, later widely known as the Kaminski Brigade, grew rapidly and served as the backbone of what came to be known as the Lokot Republic, a German-backed autonomous zone with its own administration, schools, and police. After Woskobojnik was killed in combat on the 8th of January 1942, Kaminski took full control as mayor and militia leader. By early 1942, Bronislav Kaminski had become the de facto ruler of the Lokot Republic, a home to around 500,000 people. With growing German trust, Kaminski was granted increasing authority. His representative at the headquarters of the German 2nd Panzer Army pledged that Kaminski's militia was ready to fight partisans and lead propaganda efforts against Jewish Bolshevism. German commanders responded by formally appointing Kaminski as major of the Army Rear Area 532 around Lokot. On the 19th of July 1942, Kaminski received official approval from the commander of Army Group Center, Field Marshal Günther von Kluge, and was granted limited self-governance under German oversight. Kaminski now held dual power as both chief mayor of the Lokot Republic and commander of the local militia. Under his rule, the region introduced courts, jails, a pro-German newspaper, and a ban on collective farming. Private enterprise was encouraged, a rare move in Nazi-occupied Soviet territory. Militarily, Kaminski's force grew rapidly. Starting with a few thousand, by late 1942 his brigade had expanded into a 14-battalion formation of around 8,000 men. It was equipped with tanks and artillery, some salvaged from abandoned Soviet stocks and dressed in old German uniforms. By January 1943, the militia boasted nearly 10,000 men and a small armored unit including captured KV-2 and T-34 tanks. In 1943, Kaminski's militia took part in joint German operations, which officially aimed at rooting out Soviet partisans, but quickly descended into systematic brutality. Kaminski's forces became known not only for anti-partisan warfare, but also for mass reprisals against civilians. Entire villages were burned, and residents were murdered under the guise of suspected partisan activity. As the tide of the war began to turn in the summer of 1943, Kaminski's militia faced growing problems. Soviet victories on the Eastern Front fueled mass desertions. At the same time, partisan resistance groups launched a campaign to infiltrate Kaminski's forces and turn his men against him. Several assassination attempts were made on Kaminski's life, and although he survived each one, the atmosphere around his leadership grew increasingly tense and unstable. In response to these threats, Kaminski retaliated with terrifying cruelty, and suspected plotters were publicly hanged outside his headquarters as a warning. German officers passing through Lokot during this time reported seeing bodies dangling from gallows, grim reminders that Kaminski's militia had effectively become a paramilitary terror unit, maintaining power through fear and violence. Concerned about a total collapse of control, the German military assigned a liaison staff to Kaminski's headquarters to stabilize the situation and restructure the brigade. But by then, the damage was done. According to post-war Soviet estimates, about 10,000 civilians were murdered during the existence of Kaminski's Lokot formation. These atrocities included mass executions, reprisal killings, and the destruction of entire villages, all carried out under Kaminski's command in the name of order, loyalty, and collaboration. As Soviet counteroffensives intensified in the summer of 1943, the Kaminski Brigade was forced to retreat from the Lokot region. In July 1943, Kaminski ordered the evacuation of brigade members, their families, and administrative personnel. By the end of August, up to 30,000 people had been relocated by the Germans to the Lepel area in Vitebsk in Belarus. This new region, handed over to Kaminski as his personal domain, was plagued by active partisan groups. From the outset, his brigade engaged in brutal anti-partisan warfare, carrying out operations with ruthless efficiency. Despite initial success, morale and discipline within the brigade quickly began to deteriorate. Desertions increased, and the entire unit seemed on the verge of collapse. When the commander of the 2nd Regiment, Major Tarasov, attempted to defect to the Soviet partisans with his entire unit, Kaminski personally flew to his headquarters. According to one account, Kaminski strangled Tarasov and 8 others in front of their men. Still, within 48 hours, around 200 soldiers deserted, and by October 1943, the brigade had lost 2/3 of its personnel. In response, Kaminski recruited replacements from the Belarusian police forces, Soviet prisoners of war, and even criminals released from prison. These reinforcements, along with captured tanks and German-supplied uniforms, helped rebuild the brigade. At its peak, in the spring of 1943, it numbered around 12,000 men. In January 1944, Kaminski's brigade suffered heavy losses during battles with well-organized partisan units. The German High Command, especially the 3rd Panzer Army under Colonel General Georg Hans Reinhardt, had already grown frustrated with Kaminski's lack of discipline and poor coordination. When Kaminski protested against what he saw as interference in his affairs, a German liaison officer openly mocked his objections as vanity. The insult struck a nerve, and the breakdown in relations between Kaminski and the Wehrmacht, the German armed forces, only deepened. Sensing a shift in power, Kaminski began aligning himself more closely with the SS, which had started assuming greater control over anti-partisan operations. Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, took notice and moved quickly to co-opt Kaminski. On the 27th of January 1944, Himmler rewarded Kaminski's achievements by awarding him the Iron Cross Second Class and on the same day, the Iron Cross First Class. By March, the brigade had been renamed Volksheer Brigade Kaminski, and in April it was placed under the command of SS Kampfgruppe von Gottberg, which included the infamous Dirlewanger unit, a German formation composed of convicted criminals, many of them murderers and rapists, freed to serve Hitler. Its leader, Oskar Dirlewanger, was a convicted pedophile, who in the 1930s had raped a 13-year-old girl from the League of German Girls and was involved in the molestation of other underage girls. Together they took part in mass murder and cleansing operations, in which tens of thousands of so-called bandits were reported killed, many of them civilians falsely labeled as partisans. Villages were destroyed, civilians were executed or deported for forced labor, and entire communities were wiped out. In June 1944, Kaminski's brigade was officially incorporated into the Waffen-SS, the military wing of the SS, and in August of the same year, Kaminski was promoted to Waffenbrigadeführer der SS, an equivalent of brigadier general in the US Army. Kaminski had never completed any military training, and he was the only man with this rank. On the 1st of August 1944, the Warsaw Uprising began, an armed revolt by the Polish resistance against Nazi occupation. Just days later, Bronislav Kaminski and his brigade were called in by Nazi leadership to help crush the rebellion. On the 4th of August, a combat-ready regiment from the Kaminski Brigade was dispatched to the Ochota district of Warsaw. This order came from the highest levels. Adolf Hitler himself personally requested Kaminski's support. The task force, consisting of around 1,700 mostly unmarried men, was equipped with light artillery, mortars, and several captured Soviet tanks. It was placed under the operational control of SS Gruppenführer Heinz Reinefahrt as part of Kampfgruppe Reinefahrt, a formation that included Kaminski's troops, the Dirlewanger unit, and other SS and order police forces. What followed in Ochota was one of the darkest chapters of the Warsaw Uprising. Kaminski's men, many of whom had been given permission to loot, went on a rampage of murder, rape, and robbery. Civilians were massacred in their homes, women were raped in the streets, and properties were stripped bare. The atrocities became widespread, and Kaminski reportedly focused more on collecting valuables than fighting the Polish resistance. By the end of the massacre, it is estimated that up to 10,000 civilians had been killed in the Ochota district alone, nearly all of them murdered by Kaminski's men. At the same time, the Kaminski Brigade, together with the Dirlewanger unit, participated in another horrific operation, the Wola massacre. Over the course of just 2 days, they, along with Reinefahrt's other forces, murdered approximately 60,000 civilians in the Warsaw district of Wola. The massacre was personally ordered by Adolf Hitler, who demanded that the German forces kill anything that moves to crush the uprising. They even used women and children as human shields while storming resistance positions. They burned 3 hospitals with patients inside. The nurses were whipped, gang-raped, and hanged naked together with the doctors. A radio conversation between Heinz Reinhardt and the commander-in-chief of the 9th Army, Nikolaus von Forman, has survived, in which he asks, "What should I do with the civilians? We have more prisoners than ammunition to kill them." They dealt with this on their own terms. When they found a daycare facility with 500 children inside to save their ammunition, they beat and stabbed the defenseless children to death with rifle butts and bayonets. Bronislav Kaminski met his end not at the hands of the Polish resistance or the Red Army, but by the very regime he had loyally served. On the 28th of August 1944, just weeks after his brigade's participation in the atrocities of the Warsaw Uprising, the 45-year-old Bronislav Kaminski was executed by the SS in the city of Łódź in German-occupied Poland. Officially, the reason for his execution was theft, as Kaminski and his men had looted massive quantities of valuables during the Warsaw massacres. But rather than handing over the stolen goods to the SS hierarchy as expected, Kaminski attempted to keep them for himself. This infuriated Himmler and gave him the perfect pretext to have Kaminski and his senior officers executed. The SS concocted a cover story for the Kaminski Brigade, claiming that their commander had been killed by Polish partisans. When his men doubted the tale, the Gestapo, the Nazi secret police, staged a scene. They pushed Kaminski's car into a ditch, riddled it with bullets, and smeared it with goose blood to simulate a partisan ambush. But the morale of the unit never recovered. It was soon withdrawn from Warsaw and relocated to a quieter sector far from the front. The exact motives behind Kaminski's execution, however, remain debated. Some believe he was eliminated simply because he became an embarrassment, a looter and war criminal whose actions had drawn too much attention. Others suggest he had been removed as a witness to the full scale of Nazi crimes in Warsaw. Unlike Oskar Dirlewanger, Kaminski lacked powerful allies within the SS and had no one to protect him. There is also speculation that Kaminski had become a political inconvenience, especially in light of growing Nazi support for Soviet General Andrei Vlasov, who headed the collaborationist Russian Liberation Army. Kaminski's brutal reputation and undisciplined troops stood in sharp contrast to Vlasov's efforts to present his forces as a disciplined, pro-German alternative to Bolshevism. Vlasov reportedly rejected most of Kaminski's men, dismissing them as mercenaries. Whatever the true reason, Kaminski's death marked the end of the Kaminski Brigade's expansion plans. His unit, already plagued by desertions and a shattered reputation, was no longer seen as reliable, and after Kaminski's execution, command was passed to SS Brigadeführer Christoph Diem. There were no tears shed for Bronislav Kaminski.
Thanks for watching the World History Channel. Be sure to like and subscribe, and click the bell notification icon so you don't miss our next episodes. We thank you, and we'll see you next time on the channel.